Inner Child Part 1: The Abandoned and Separated Inner Child. Why do we live so much in the past? The answer is because of our inner child. Our inner child is meant to grow in presence with us, but early childhood trauma and fear-based experiences created a split between the inner child and our present state. Meanwhile, our present state continued to grow and develop, while our inner child stayed behind. This is what eventually separates the inner child into a lost aspect of ourselves, stuck in what we would consider the past. And while we are here in what we would consider our present moment, much of our healing involves revisiting aspects of us in the past. Essentially, it's about the reformation of our inner child, something that splintered from internal darkness, fear, and trauma, and grew in the separation from ourselves. This is also why the energy of abandonment is so prevalent within so many people. It's not only about the abandonment that you feel that caused the initial split from the inner child in the first place, but it's also about the abandonment that you feel from holding yourself apart from yourself. Doing inner child healing work helps to bridge the gap between where we are right now and where our inner child is. It brings the inner child closer to where we are, mending and repairing the relationship between you and you, so that your now moment presence becomes more in a state of being in union rather than a state of doing in separation. Most of humanity has abandoned inner children simply because this is how modern society has nurtured and raised us once the initial split happened. We embrace that development comes in linear stages, when actually expanded development can happen in more multi-experiential layers. This is where we are headed in terms of parenting and childhood development. And we'll talk more about childhood development in a way that nurtures the inner child union in one of the next episodes. But for now, I want to talk a little bit more about our current inner child and how we can nurture our internal relationships to help us let go of the past and embrace a more joyful future in union with our inner child. Our inner child is here, ready, willing, and able to work with us to make this big shift into a new earth frequency. It has taken a step back for many years as we worked within the constructs of a survival-based experience. But we are finding ourselves on the leading edge right now, where our feet meet the edge of a cliff, so to speak. In other words, we find ourselves in between where our past has brought us and where our future is taking us, and they exist in two different frequencies, or essentially realities. Therefore, we must decide. Do we return to the familiar energy of our past, or do we take a leap into an unknown and exciting future? The pull of our spirit is so much stronger than our desires here in the physical, meaning even though we may want to stay in our comfortable spots and not change, the call of our spirit pulls us to the leading edge in order to face the things that we want and the things that we hold ourselves back from. And even though it can be a scary place to step out from the ledge and into the unknown, many of us are being pulled so strongly to do so right now, despite any internal fear. And because we're being so strongly pulled to do so, it's making us face a lot of this internal fear that rises as we step out into the unknown. So as we meet ourselves in this way, our inner child also meets us here too. Why? Because if we choose to take the next steps into the unknown, our inner child must accompany us in union, not separation. We must unionize all of our energy, including our inner child. We cannot jump and leave any part of us behind. This is because, energy-wise, the frequency of where we are headed is moving more into a frequency of union. The frequency of where we have been in the past was more of a frequency of separation. So that frequency of separation supported the separating of inner child and our present moment. Whereas where we are headed into our new earth experience is a frequency that nurtures the union of the inner child and our present moment. And essentially the union of all parts of us within our present moment, past, present, and future in the now. We are going through a process of inner child reintegration, where we meet many parts of ourselves that our inner child wants us to meet in order to find who we truly are in the eyes of God. And this is because our inner child holds the eyesight of God, in the sense that its purity and wonder are why we chose to have this experience in the first place. Inner child reintegration is about bridging our physical bodies and our emotional bodies in the heart space, where our spiritual body can come forth. When the inner child split from our present moment, a split between physical body and emotional body occurred and then grew over time, separating ourselves from our feelings and also separating our ability to process our feelings. And the inability to process our feelings only closed our hearts more, which closed off also our spiritual bodies more, and also compacted internal energy into stored energy that would have otherwise been expelled or transmuted. After the splitting of the inner child, we left that sense of purity and wonder behind to forge paths based more on fear and survival. The inner child is not wounded, despite what we may think. Yes, we must do a lot of inner child healing to reveal our true inner child, but the inner child is not wounded. It always knows who it truly is, and it always holds the eyesight of God. It is our relationship with our inner child that becomes wounded. It's similar to how our experiences or our feelings can complicate or sabotage our relationships. We have done the same with our inner child. Many of the ways that we conduct ourselves in relationships will give you powerful insight into how your relationship with your inner child is engineered. Relationships always reflect to us how our own relationship with ourselves is going, but often we ignore seeing ourselves in order to see another person more. Many of our inner child wounds emerge in relationships to show us where our relationship with our inner child is either thriving or surviving. The reason why we feel safe or unsafe, for example, in relationships, is never because of the other person necessarily, but because we are in a reflective union with someone who is taking the shape of our inner child. When you do not feel safe in a relationship, you must also take a look internally, because there is a link in between you and your inner child that also does not feel safe. Please note that this is not a representation of where responsibility lies in relationships. Every person must take responsibility for themselves, and if you do not feel safe, it must be your decision and responsibility to leave the situation. And when we say that it's not because of the other person that you feel unsafe or safe, it does not mean that it is not an unsafe situation, but it does mean that you are feeling unsafe for a reason. And if you do not begin to understand what internal layers feel unsafe between you and your inner child, then you will continue to encounter these same patterns of not feeling safe in other relationships too. Taking responsibility for how you feel means also taking responsibility for the life that you are creating and experiencing.